Valentine's Day is coming up, guys. That's your reminder. If you need to get a box of chocolate candies for your special someone, this is the place to do it. They are the second largest provider of chocolate candy boxes in the United States. And of course, we all know Easter is right around the corner, and that means heavenly hash and gold brick, and of course, pecan eggs. And we're going to talk about how we're celebrating 100 years of heavenly hash. So, with no further ado, I bring to you Rob Nelson, the CEO of Elmer's Chocolate. Rob, welcome to the show.
I'm happy to be here, Parker. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for doing this. It's always nice. I drive by your factory, more times a day than I can mention. We're neighbors here on North 5th Street, and it's wonderful to have you in the building. Why don't we kick things off with you just telling our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Wow. I've been in the candy business literally all my life. I mean, my parents moved to New Orleans in the early 60s. My grandfather went into business with the Elmer family and then bought the company. And it was in New Orleans at the time. My grandfather was a great salesman, but he wasn't much of a manufacturing guy. My dad, who was a physicist designing missiles for McDonnell Douglas out in California.
Wow.
My grandfather enticed him to come to New Orleans and learn the candy business. So, I was born shortly thereafter, and as soon as I could walk, I was loading trucks and helping out. Certainly on the Saturday afternoons when my dad was in trying to fix equipment himself. But grew up when the company moved to Ponchatoula in 1970. My family moved to just outside Covington.
Okay.
And I went to school there. I went to St. Paul's for high school, and undergrad at Tulane, undergraduate business, and I went to law school at LSU.
Oh, wow. So, yeah, we share a lot in common. I did the Tulane to LSU law route. You were able to dodge the active practice of law. That proves you're smarter than I am. Good decision there.
It was always, initially it was my plan to practice law, but at the time our company had some growth and it was a lot to handle at the time. And I had been working on projects for the company for a number of years, but once you get into the candy business, and if you ever met other people in the industry, you would realize that it's just one big family, and it's a great industry. And I've got some of my biggest competitors that are some of my closest friends. So
I love to see industries that are with friendly competitors, because the practice of law, at least my area, can be that way too. There's certainly some bad actors out there, some cutthroat ambulance chaser types, but for the most part, the other injury attorneys I know feel like a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So we may technically look like competitors, but we're brainstorming and sharing ideas. Is candy business like that? It sounds like you suggest it might be.
Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, you work together as a team, or you kind of work together, and the rising tide, raises all boats. That's exactly right.
So it's just possible you have Willy Wonka on speed dial or something. You don't have to reveal that, but that's pretty cool. It's neat that you candidly share the difference between your grandfather and your father, the technical expertise versus the sales. Because my first grader, who you met off camera a little while ago, he was in this next room. He's an aspiring inventor and engineer, and he's working on this. I think they call it Crunch Labs box, but he just built, if not designed, a disc launcher that he's been firing away. I think he is right now outside my window firing away in the yard. But it's funny because I don't have a technical engineering type bone in my body. I sound more like your grandpa, as your kind of classic liberal arts lawyer. And here's my son who goes in an opposite direction. And it's neat with a company as big as Elmer's. I guess it kind of takes all types, right? Because somebody's got to man the finances. Somebody's got to get into that magic of somebody's heart on how to sell, candy. And then somebody's got to build a factory to make it. So hopefully with today's interview, we can ask you a little bit about all of that. But before we get into the details of Elmer's, why don't we circle back to your childhood outside of Covington? Because, you mentioned moving from New Orleans, the biggest city in Louisiana, to, you know, Covington is not really a big town. You know, it's maybe more affluent than Ponchatoula, but it's not very populated. And there's a lot of woods around there. And it sounds like you guys were not in the heart of downtown. So what was life like for you out there? Was it kind of a country upbringing, or, you know, what was it like at the Nelson House?
Well, Covington was a lot different back then than it is today. I think of now the intersection where North Causeway hits, you know, Highway 22 there in Mandeville, which is a major intersection with overpasses and exits and lights and multi-lane roads. That was a four-way stop sign when we moved over there.
Wow.
So it's changed quite. I mean, there's no really. It's interesting because so many. You know, we have people that work in our company whose kids go to St. Paul's or went to St. Paul's, and it's completely different today. So, but growing up there, you know, it was the days where you could leave in the morning on your bike and, you know, not come back until it was dark, and your parents wouldn't think twice about it. You could go fishing on the river, or go play golf or whatever. And, you know, we had a lot of freedom back then. And it's unfortunate, I don't know that we have that as much anymore, you know, for our kids, but we had back then. But I loved it. You know, I loved the North Shore, and I love Tangipahoa Parish too. I mean, I've actually probably most of my life I have now spent in Tangipahoa Parish. I mean, certainly
that's
true.
If you do the math, all the hours you spend at work, that makes sense. Well, let me ask you about Tangipahoa Parish, because I know that, you know, all of us, you know, have this issue of why here, right? And in your case, it's not just you and your family and your personal livelihood and what you do as a profession, but you've been entrusted, you know, you have a stewardship of this giant company that employs over 400 people. And your family moved it here to Ponchatoula in 1970. And recently, we're all familiar with these big expansions, which I'll ask you about more specifically in a bit. But I guess my question is, there certainly were opportunities to go to other places, probably that could provide cheaper labor, cheaper tax incentives, you know, et cetera. But you guys have made a conscious, you know, decision not just to invest here in 1970, but to hunker down, double down, or certainly more than double down, to stay here and expand your workforce, expand your factory, and just put, you know, tons of money here. So my question is kind of why. I mean, you've been at the helm now for a long time, and the big expansions were on your watch. So what do you think about Ponchatoula, Tangipahoa, and kind of why have y'all chosen to dig roots here even deeper?
Well, I think first of all, I mean, Tangipahoa is a wonderful place to do business. I mean, when you look at business, it's not Elmer Candy, and it's not me and Elmer Candy. I mean, Elmer Candy is made up of the 450 people that work there, and so, you know, the decisions we make and the direction we go for the company has everybody in mind, and what we think is best going forward, and to provide good paying careers for people long term. So there certainly was a time before we made our last expansion there was a choice. I mean, either we had to automate, or, you know, we had to move out of the country. We had to go abroad somewhere, and ultimately it was risky for what we did, but we did it. And, you know, I'm grateful that we have wonderful people in our company that have. I mean, they're people that have put their sweat and tears into our making what we're building a success. So it has to be a win-win for everybody, not just the people at Elmer, but also the community. And I think that's what's special about Tangipahoa, because the people we've worked with here over the years understand that, you know, if the company is successful, the community can be successful, and vice versa. So we're all interconnected, and the better it works together, the better off everybody.
Well, I love that you talk about your employees and their interests as stakeholders, you know, in this situation. But I've had the pleasure of representing some very long-time employees of yours that worked there for decades, and they speak glowingly about you personally and your family, the company, and how they've been treated through thick and thin times. And so I commend you for that. But I want to ask kind of, how does a decision like that come to a head? Because, the law's changing a ton all the time. And every week I get a new report on how AI is going to put old-fashioned lawyers like me out of business. And I studied the law during the last millennium when we still use books. And those are totally, the books behind you now haven't been opened in years. But how do you know? I mean, is that something where you're reading industry periodicals, talking to other people? I mean, how do you know that kind of decision is looming, and how does it come to a head with the family that owns the company, the leadership team in place that runs the company, down to the employee stakeholders you mentioned? How does a big corporate decision like that, expand or leave, come to a head?
Well, in the end, you've got to be the best at something, or else you're not going to survive. I mean, generally, in any market segment that there is in consumer packaged goods, there's really comes down to two companies that are going to capture the majority of the profit pool in that segment. And so you got to be one or two. And if you're not one or two, you're not going to be around much long. You're not going to be around long term. So, would it be, what does it take? It takes to be competitive on price and be able to. We've got to be able to make a margin that we can stay in business and
right.
continue to finance growth and pay people. But at the same time, our retailers have to be able to make they have a margin that they've got to make to run their company. And there's price points that we've got to hit. And
right.
So we know that over time, look, the cost of doing business doesn't go down. I mean, it's going to go up. And so how do we deal with that? And that's really through technology. And so that's what we've done. The jobs we have. So you look back. I mean, you're probably too young, but people that remember the old show "I Love Lucy" of Lucy trying to package the little chocolates. It wasn't much different than that in our plant prior to 2007. I mean, we had 6 different lines just lined with people putting chocolate into boxes, and we had people that could put 120 pieces a minute into a box.
Oh my gosh!
And talk to each other while they did it. They were unbelievable.
That's like those famous oyster shuckers out of A Meat. It's like
I've done every job in the company, and at some point in time, that's the one I could not do. But and if you're talking about our family environment that we have in our company, and we want people to learn and grow and to advance in their lives and provide for their families. When you're just talking about putting candy in a box, you're really not walking the talk. You've got to provide some opportunity. So today, yes, just about every piece of candy is put in a box by a robot, but we employ way more people, and our business has grown. So I mean, it's helped everybody.
So the myth that these robots were going to take people's jobs and put the workforce out to pasture just didn't seem to be true. You mentioned you hired more people now than ever. I believe that number is around 450. Is that right?
That's about right. Yes.
Wow. So and it's also my understanding that you guys are not a minimum wage operation. You're starting people out at maybe $15 or more an hour and paying much more than that in some instances. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, if someone works 40 hours a week, they can earn $15, $16 just starting. That's entry level.
Yeah, that's great opportunity right up the road. So I don't know whether Elmer has any opening, folks, but we hear people all the time griping about lack of opportunities here in our backyard. We've got this, premier company right here on 5th Street, going up toward Range Road. So keep that in mind. If you're watching and you either need a job or have a loved person who does, whether Rob's hiring now or later, it's none of my business, but please pay attention that we have this great employer here in our backyard. So let's talk about the history of the company, because I do want to ask you about the expansion, the technology, the improved efficiencies, but I think it makes sense to go all the way back to the beginning to learn about Elmer Chocolate or Elmer Candy Corporation. And it's my understanding that although you moved to Ponchatoula in 1970, the company goes way back to the 1850s, and you didn't always specialize in Valentine boxes and Heavenly Hash and Easter, confection. So would you mind giving us a history of the company?
Sure. So the company was founded in 1855 by German immigrant Christopher Henry Miller. He came to New Orleans. He immigrated from Germany in the 1840s, and he worked as an apprentice in a pastry shop in New Orleans, and actually went out west and tried to sell pastries to the people mining for gold during the gold rush. That didn't work out so well, so he came back to New Orleans and started a candy company. And he had, I believe, 9 daughters, and one married a guy by the name of Augustus Elmer. And so originally the company was Miller Candy. Around the turn of the late 1800s, it was Miller Elmer Candy. And then shortly after the turn of the century, it just became Elmer Candy. So, and then the Elmer family is a fairly large family in New Orleans, and there's actually Elmer Fine Foods that makes Chewies,
right.
Product we used to make. That Alan Elmer makes those now in New Orleans. No relation to us; he's related to the original Elmer family. But yeah, so our company was the jack of all trades, master of none for a long time. The way the candy business worked back then, and even up until the 70s and 80s, or 1970s and 80s, I should say, is you had these general line candy companies, and they made all types of candy, but just for a specific regional, part of the country. And so,
gotcha. Okay.
And so, there's
companies Hershey might supply Pennsylvania, and Elmer might supply New Orleans,
right?
But you're not shipping up and down the line that much like you do now. Okay.
Right. But when you started having national retailers come on the scene, and then the drug chains started consolidating, that's where it comes back to, you've got to be good at something to compete nationwide, or else you're not going to be in business. Right. There's a lot of family-owned companies that don't exist anymore, but the ones that specialized are the ones that are here. So we picked seasonal box chocolate, primarily Valentine. But there was a company in California called Herman Golitz. They were a regional candy company. You would know them today as Jelly Belly. Yeah. There's one out of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. They made a general line candy company in Pennsylvania. You would know them today as Just Born, that makes Mike and Ike's and Peeps for Easter. So everybody found that niche, and like I said, you got to be good at something, or else you're not going to make it.
And once upon a time, you guys were all making chocolate bars and chocolate bunnies, and just kind of that makes sense. And I see the same thing in the law. I was blessed with great mentors right here on Main Street in Ponchatoula, in the late Tom Waterman and Andrew Edwards, who's a dear friend, and they were both great general practice lawyers of their time. But what we saw from the 40 years or so they practiced law to the last 20 when I've been doing it is the law gets more and more specialized. And so, for example, what I do now, I do nothing but car accident and injury work. I would be going up against lawyers that do nothing but defending those cases. If you have an 18-wheeler case, it's a lawyer that does nothing but defending 18-wheeler wrecks. And if you go in there as a generalist who does wills on Wednesdays and something else on Monday, Tuesday, you'll get your butt kicked on Thursday or Friday.
Absolutely.
And so I'm hearing that the chocolate, industry or candy industry sounds similar. If you don't mind, Rob, I'd like to share some comments here, because we've got several wonderful comments coming in here. And the first comes from one of your former employees, Trisha Nicholas. And this, of course, is a lady that knows her sweets. Every kid in town knows her. And so she says, hey, Rob, that you were her first job. Elmer Candy was her first job when she moved to Ponchatoula in 1999. And yours is a great family. So, Trisha, what do they say, Trisha? It takes one to know one. You and Scully have a great family yourself. And folks, if like me, you're a lifelong fan of the Willy Wonka movie, and you grew up here in Ponchatoula imagining Oompa Loompas and Elmer Candy, Rob is basically the Willy Wonka of town, but Trisha is the candy. Remember the Candyman scene at the outset? It's a great song. She's the candy lady. But please, visit her sweet shop. She's newly relocated to Main Street. over there on the corner, and just a wonderful lady. My kiddos love you. So Tricia, thank you for stopping by and leaving a comment. Speaking of wonderful women that we love, Mandy Franks Braywick says happy 100th episode, and she just talks about what a great asset this show's been to the community. So Mandy, your interview was one of my favorites. You're one of my favorite people. Thank you for saying that. And another one of my favorite people, Miss Faye Ivaniski, says that it's great, Rob, to learn about the history of Elmer's. She doesn't know you personally, but she knows that Elmer's has always been here helping in the community. And one example of that is the girls' high school basketball championship, Sweet 16, that was held in Hammond for many years. She served on that board and helped put that tournament together, and you guys were always there for them. So thank you, and I want to thank you for that. We were I serve on the North Oaks Foundation board, and we had our quarterly meeting yesterday. And somebody, it's that time of year, right? 100 years of Heavenly Hatch, you're on the top of the mind. But one of the folks there that works with the hospital foundation mentioned about how generous Elmer's has been, and it might not even been a hospital thing, but they said, you're always donating candies to charity and goodwill. So you guys have been great community partners. I know when my dad was sheriff, he spoke glowingly about your parents and all that they did for the community. My brother Bree can't say enough good things about you. So thank you for that. Looks like Tricia doubled back and said she went to work for you before COVID, and then she opened up her shop, and she's selling gold brick topping there for her ice cream. So we're going to ask you about your products later, and I love that topping, so I'm going to be sure to mention that. But thanks, folks. To anyone else watching live, know that you have the ability to share your comment with Rob here. So if you've got a question about Elmer, if you've got a question to Rob personally or me, or just want to say something nice as Mandy and Faye and Tricia have, please do so. Quick reminder, if you joined us lately, we're with Rob Nelson, the CEO of Elmer Candy Company, and he's been telling us about the rich history of this company. So you mentioned the Millers started it, the Elmer family, which was, I guess, a son-in-law, took it to the next. When did the Nelsons come into the mix of Elmer Candy?
That'd be in the early 60s.
Okay.
Probably between 62 and 64.
And would that be your grandfather? Was he the purchaser?
That was my grandfather. So he was divorced at the time, and he met a woman out west that was from New Orleans, lived in New Orleans, and she was a widow. Mm-hmm. And the first time they were ever on a date, he said, "I'm going to marry you." So they were dating, and he decided he needed to come check out this New Orleans thing. So he gets on an airplane, flies to New Orleans. Well, he gets to New Orleans, there's nobody at the airport to pick him up. And my then future grandmother was, something happened to the car, she was in traffic, couldn't get out there. My grandfather sitting there looking at his watch, he's like, well, she doesn't show up in 20, 30 minutes, I'm getting on that next flight back to the West Coast. Wow. That's how close we came to not being here today.
Right. But, and of course, this is pre-cell phone era. So you guys that are listening, understand nobody was going to pick up one of these and call in. This is the old smoke signals era. So wow, so that for you, that's kind of your Marty McFly moment, right? Back to the future, will they or won't they?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a great story.
But
well, thank goodness he waited, and thank goodness she showed, and here you are. So you mentioned your grandfather, great salesman. He's maybe the P.T. Barnum of the family. Can promote the product, but he's no engineer whiz. But your dad, sounds like a literal rocket scientist. How did your grandfather convince him to make that transition? Because as you mentioned, he's working for one of the premier companies in the world, got a great job. I'm sure it was no small order to get him to move to Sleepy Covington and a plant in Ponchatoula and get going. What was that like as far as you know?
Honestly, I don't know that I ever asked him that question. I know that it was a situation where it was going to be a trial basis, and they promised my mother that if she didn't like it, they would go back, and they got here and never left. So it's kind of like me getting Candy into the business and not ever leaving, because it is a great business, and the opportunity to work with great people, and it's been a good life. So I'm glad my dad made that decision. I'm glad I made the decision.
Yeah. So you mentioned, you went to law school with the intention of practicing law, but the business is growing. Did you ever consider, I mean, once you hit, it sounds like you've been a happy candy man since the day you arrived. Of course, you knew what you were getting into. You grew up in it. So it wasn't like you flew into town from far away for something new. But was there ever the call of the wild to leave, consider practicing law, doing something else? Or did you always kind of know once you were there that this was a lifetime commitment?
Yeah, once you get in, it's certainly a lifetime commitment. But a law degree certainly is beneficial in business.
Sure.
I've got a group of friends of mine and we meet monthly, and essentially there's a group of 9 of us, and we meet monthly, and half of us have law degrees and half of us are engineers, and
Oh,
but
cool.
we all run companies, and nobody practices law. So it's important in business to have that understanding, and there are pitfalls and things that you want to avoid, and it's helpful. It's helpful to have that.
All right, absolutely. Well, tell me this: what's a day in the life like running a candy company? What are the kind of issues that pop up? Obviously there's a lot to it. 450 employees, tons of products, a lot of moving parts. But what would and so there's probably no typical day, but for people that are curious about what happens, inside that factory or inside that business, what would you like to share?
Goal is to make it as typical as possible. Obviously,
Right.
when you're able to standardize things in business and do the same thing every day, it makes it much more efficient. And certainly during COVID, it's been anything but that.
I bet.
It's COVID and supply chain challenges. Our lives in the last 2 years have been completely different than what it was before that, and where we're getting to now. Not knowing on a you think about, we're getting chocolate trucks every day, and if one gets hung up in the supply chain, you're not getting your supply of chocolate, that can shut us down.
Right.
Of the products we make, there's so many. Not only do we make the candy, we make a lot of our own packaging too, or we assemble it on site. So there's so many pieces and parts. If it doesn't come together, it's a lot of people standing around with nothing to do. So that's bad for everyone.
Yeah. 450
hey, if I get
employees.
into work and we have no crises, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just
So you can basically have, obviously a candy plant, so you've got chocolate, sugar, consumables, but it sounds like you also have a plastic, paper. I mean, with packaging, that brings in a whole new angles, right? So, I mean, you guys are really a multifaceted factory, it sounds like.
absolutely. And then on top of that, we do make product for other companies, and sometimes in those situations you have to use their supplier, so it's doubling up. I mean,
Right.
again, in business, you're trying to reduce the complexities so that we can be more efficient and make it easier for everybody. And that's,
Yeah.
and we were there, and COVID threw us for a loop, and we're working to get back there. And we're getting close. We'll get there.
Well, and I think people can relate to that, from the obvious run on the grocery store that happened at the beginning on the consumer level, where people couldn't get toilet paper and hand sanitizer. I remember when my local pediatrician told me they couldn't get hand sanitizer. I found a chemical company in California and bought a 50-gallon drum because they were telling me it would be months. And then we're remodeling a house right now. Appliances that were ordered over a year ago are not here yet, and you can't, so people see it on the consumer end, but to think about it at the big level, it's one thing for me to complain about a new oven not being in and we're cooking out of the old one or using the toaster oven more often. That's something we can live with, right? But when you're talking about trucks of chocolate not making it here because of supply chain issues, you can't make them. Heck, if there's no heavenly hash in a few weeks in Easter, we're in trouble. You're shipping nearly 50 million boxes of Valentine's candy all across the nation here, this week, next week, etc. So those are big time issues. So I guess, is it fair to say logistics is one of the primary issues there?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly incoming and now I would say from a freight standpoint, things have loosened up quite a bit this year versus where they were a year ago. But you think about materials and things like that, but it's also parts. I mean, when you have a lot of high tech equipment, things do break, and things that we might have been able to overnight 3 years ago, now it might be a 60-day lead time. So you better have one on the shelf ready to go. So our inventory just for parts has had to increase, and that's been expensive.
Yeah.
But, so it's amazing. I mean, I'm sitting here on the backside. It seemed like for 2 years you just concentrated. We just got to get that product on the shelf, and I got to hand it to our team because a year ago when you saw a lot of bare shelves at retail. We shipped 100% of our Christmas and Valentine. Some of it was a little behind schedule, but I can tell you that in Valentine's season in January when it started or after Christmas, there were probably a handful of companies that had product on the shelf, and we were one of them. So
that's great.
That was a huge accomplishment for our team.
Yeah, absolutely. That says a lot about your team, and also about the preparation you had going in. Because I learned in COVID that being on the cutting edge of technology for law firms helped us a ton. We already had the ability when the world was learning what the heck Zoom, and we already had teleconference ability and e-signature and all that. It helped us a ton. I would imagine the same's true for you. So if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about the improvements in efficiency and the technology. You mentioned earlier robots now doing packaging that people used to do. How did you become aware of this cutting edge technology you'd need, and what are some of the kind of cool toys that are working behind the scenes there, machines and such?
Yeah, there are, just being in the industry, you're aware of the people that make different types of equipment. There's people that do it well and people that do it not so well. We're fortunate to deal with, work with a lot of great vendors. So again, our success, you talked about stakeholders, our vendors, we are certainly a stakeholder in what we do.
Sure.
If we're successful, they're successful, vice versa. But for us, for what we did in 2015 and 16, we'd already started, robotically picking or packing candies. But the key thing back in 2015 and 16 was handling, moving that candy around. I mean, we make between 4 and 5 million pieces of candy a day. And
wow! Wait, 5 million pieces of candy in Ponchatoula a day.
Holy moly! You got to move that from where you're making it, and then we're sorting that into a box, and you got to move that around. And that what we did in 2015, 16 was a big part about handling how to efficiently handle that many pieces of candy in a day. So and that's being family owned and privately owned and having a great team of people. I mean, we come up with ideas and we bet on it and we work. We see it through to the end, and then that's I guess having that long-term vision. I mean, or being able to play the long game in business rather than just making your numbers look good for this quarter or this year. What's the playing that long game? How are you going to be sustainable over the long haul? And to have a good team of people that buys into that philosophy is very important.
So you mentioned family owned, and I don't remember whether you told me this off air or whether on air, but it's my understanding that you're the second largest producer of Valentine's chocolate boxes in the country. Is that right?
That's correct.
But in the context of family owned businesses, I guess my question is this: are most candy companies, that do what y'all do or some version of it, like are they family owned like yours? Are they corporate? And how do you stack up at Elmer versus other family owned companies? Are y'all big, small, or somewhere in between?
Kind of mid-size, small to mid-size. I mean, but there are a lot of family-owned companies. I mean, even one of the largest in our industry, which is Mars Wrigley, is family-owned.
Okay.
Hershey, name everybody knows. It's technically on the stock market, but the Hershey Trust owns the majority of the stock. But a lot of the brands out there, the brands that everybody loves, I mean, they're mostly family owned.
That's cool.
And it's so that is unusual in business.
And do you have a theory as to why? I mean, it would just seem to me like you would see, the Halliburtons of the world or whoever, just big corporate X coming in. Is it because they can't understand how to produce as well as someone like you who's lived in a candy factory his whole life, or what do you think the reason for that is?
I mean, that could be part of it, but our category is also a little bit unusual for the number of companies that are out there. So I know that retailers sometimes talk about, they have their candy buyer, or their buyers that buy the different categories at the store. The candy buying position is one of the more, I don't know if it's difficult, but it's certainly more involved because there's so many different companies and so many different segments. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities for specialization where there might not be as many in other categories or under other industries.
Well, let's take that and pivot into specialty products that you have, because they've been phenomenally successful. And of course, I want to lead off with 100 years of Heavenly Hash, because that's really big news. And here we are with that. So would you mind telling us about Heavenly Hash and, the 100-year story, and from that, maybe jump off into any other products you want to discuss?
Well, yeah, we're really celebrating the 100th anniversary for Heavenly Hash. Our company bought that. So it was actually invented by a confectionery shop that was downtown New Orleans, right around the turn of the century. The Elmer family purchased that recipe, and let me say that the confectionery shop really did it, in slabs, and really like you would go in any fancy shop. It was not mass produced or anything like that. The Elmer family bought it in 1923 along with the trademark. So yeah, Heavenly Hash is a trademark name, and if you see it out there, it's not an authorized use of it. Ours is Heavenly Hash. We're the only one, because
you're the only street legal Heavenly Hash.
We're the street legal one, yeah.
You're the real deal. It reminds me, my first job was working at Hi-Ho in Hammond, and I'm sure you've had Hi-Ho barbecue sandwiches.
Absolutely.
Well, I remember when I was working there in the 90s, about 2 or 3 knockoff Hi-Hos with different sauces and different recipes, and it was often imitated, never duplicated. And it sounds like Heavenly Hash has a bit of that in its history too.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly it's one of those things. I mean, that people want to. We only make it at Easter time, so I mean, try to recreate it at other times of the year, I guess. But so we really started mass producing at that time, and here when we built the original factory in Ponchatoula, it was really set up. That was one of the primary products the plant was designed to produce. We started out making a marshmallow mixture in our cream kitchen, which was the old cream kitchen. Literally, and my brother likes to say that the way we make box chocolates is the Jetsons. The way we make Easter is the Flintstones, because it's it's really kind of an art. We can't really. It's hard to automate that. It's just it's more of it's less science, more art.
Yeah, well, Trish is back on here with her comment that her favorite thing to watch at the factory back when she worked for you was the people thumbing the almonds in to get it just right. Because you have those 2 perfectly placed almonds in every Heavenly Hash, kind of like the pickles on a Chick-fil-A sandwich. It's part of your iconic, recipe. That's really cool. Well, there's a debate out there, and of course, in my house, it's a fierce one. Heavenly Hash versus Gold Brick. Heavenly Hash, seems more famous. Maybe that's just because we're at the 100-year anniversary. But how do those 2 products stack up? Is there kind of a sales war between the 2 of them? Do they run similarly, or how's that work?
It's usually neck and neck. 1 year it's Gold Brick, 1 year it's Heavenly Hash. I can tell you that this year Heavenly Hash is out in front, though. I think Heavenly Hash is going to pull it out this year.
It better be. We've got to let it win. Kelly Brandon is on. She's got a question for you, Rob. She asked, when are y'all going to bring back strawberry heavenly hash? Is that a plan in the works?
We need to do that. So, you know, where strawberry heavenly hash came from, you talk about mentors, and someone that I work for, that I did work for in the legal world for a period of time, was John Hankel.
Oh yeah, what a great guy, hero of mine.
And he would give me such a hard time. He's like, you got every kind of flavored candy, but you don't have strawberry, and you're here in Ponchatoula. And he called me out publicly all the time. So that's we launched the strawberry heavenly hash. The reason we didn't have it last year, there was a cornstarch shortage last year.
Okay.
And marshmallow is molded in cornstarch. So you basically have a tray of cornstarch, you have a die that makes an indentation, which is the footprint, the die for the marshmallow egg, part of the egg. And so having a shortage of cornstarch, we were limited to how much heavenly hash we could make last year. And unfortunately, and being just kind of late in the game, that was a casualty last year. And it didn't make it. It's not going to make it back this year, but yes, it's something I'd like to get back on the shelf.
So Senator Hankel had a way with, he could publicly call you out while remaining a friend. We're going to call on our state rep, Bill Wheat, who's running for Senate, and say, let's make that bring back strawberry heavenly hash part of the campaign. That's funny. Tricia says she misses the huge gold brick eggs that had the little wrapped nuggets on the inside.
Yeah, I mean, and again, that became a casualty of COVID, just a shortage of having enough people, and that's very labor intensive, and
I bet
it's gotten to a point where that is very much of an art. I mean, it really should be priced like a piece of art, because that's what it takes to make it. And we did try to find somebody that could make that for us. That's the kind of thing that they do, and
right.
I don't think they really got Easter in Louisiana. They weren't.
Well, tell us about Easter in Louisiana, because it's my understanding, the Valentine's, the Jetsons part of your operation, Valentine's, is gigantic and national. You're selling, tens and tens and tens of millions of chocolate boxes, for Valentine's all over the country. But as I understand it, Easter around here really kicks butt on a regional level. And we're buying these Easter products here on the Gulf Coast much more than the rest of the nation. Is that right? Tell us how that compares and how that all breaks down.
Yeah, so right now we got Valentine's Day on Tuesday, so everybody's got to go out and buy their Valentine hearts, by Monday, because you've got to have that on Tuesday. But what you see for a national retailer that if you go to here in our neck of the woods here, what you see on the shelf here is exactly what you're going to see on the shelf on the West Coast, East Coast, really out throughout North America. When it comes to Easter, what you see on the shelf here is not what you see everywhere else. It's the bulk of almost all of what we make for Easter, you'll find it between Houston and Pensacola, and it's about as far north as I-20. Now, you'll find it outside that area, it's tough. But there's a sales measure that you take total sales, you divide it by points of distribution, how many stores it's in, and it gives you a velocity figure. These items are the highest velocity in the nation. What we sell in this market, we outsell the national leader in this market. It's very unusual, and I think it just goes back to traditions.
That's impressive.
Traditions are passed on.
Yeah.
I once heard that. Well, I've looked it up. This is true. Louisiana has the most people that live here that were actually born here. So if you look at all the different states, the population in that state, Louisiana has the highest level of people, the highest level of the population of people. Those people were actually born in the state. So that lends itself to traditions, and I mean, it's not just candy; it goes to everything that we have here in Louisiana.
So Mama's cooking may keep them here, but they're buying heavenly hash while they're eating Mama's gumbo come Easter. Absolutely. That's really neat. Well, let me ask you an advice related question, because clearly you've been incredibly successful. You mentioned earlier your group of lawyers and engineers. It sounded like a neat kind of mastermind type group that gets together. What are some lessons you've learned along the way in all these years, at running Elmer and preparing for the day you would run? You could be lessons you learned on the front line packaging candy, but what are some things you'd share with young people now who are looking to go into your business or any other?
Well, I think really the key to everything is awareness and understanding, not what maybe is popular today, but really understanding what, or getting a feel for where you think things are going and aiming for that. It's kind of like in hockey, the person, skating to where the puck is going to be, not where it is.
Yeah, that great Wayne Gretzky quote. That's a wonderful point.
And so, you're not always right, but you can't just be reactive. You really it's about being proactive and really driving the market rather than being driven by the market. So, be visionary, be inventive, really try to be that trailblazer and being the first to do something, not just doing because you're reacting to something else.
Great advice. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to share something kind of neat with you, a little twist here. We've got a comment, a brief one. Congratulations from Don McClure, but perhaps the most interesting one yet in this regard. Don McClure is in Istanbul, Turkey right now, I think. At least he was yesterday.
Wow.
This is a friend of mine who's got a law firm in Houston, Texas, but he and his family move around the world 1 month at a time. They kind of slow travel. They were in, I think, Georgia, not the state, but the nation last month, and they've done everything from England and Italy to whatever. But just so you know, your show's being watched all the way around across the world in Istanbul.
Well, so if they're in Turkey, I hope they're safe. I mean, I know that.
Amen to that. Absolutely. Our prayers go out to all those victims of that earthquake. Just terrifying. Miss Patricia Vicknair. Hey, Miss Pat. So good to see you. What a sweetheart she is. She says, good to see you, Rob. She's glad business is still up.
Worked with Pat for many years.
Yeah, she's wonderful.
Elmer's.
We see her at church every Sunday. Her grandson and my boys, are thick as thieves there. They do Sunday school together, they play together. Just great family. Well, folks, I promised Rob I would get him back to his beautiful family on time tonight. So, Rob, I'm going to offer you the opportunity to talk about anything I didn't think to ask. So if you have something on your mind, on your heart, please share it with us.
Well, again, I just say I got to remind everybody Valentine's Day is on Tuesday. And,
Thank you.
Some wonderful Valentine hearts on the store shelves, and the other thing too, we will, we are hiring and we will be ramping up. I mean, we actually will be hiring faster and earlier than we've ever done any other year that we've done. So. There are certainly opportunities, and I tell you, to get in and get another piece of advice, you dig in and learn something in technology. It opens up so many doors for a career in life, because you don't have to have that college degree or a master's or whatever if you master something in technology, you can write your own ticket.
Absolutely. And it's everywhere. When I dropped my kid off today at pre-K, somebody had messed with the teacher's smart board. And they need somebody with technology to get the sound back on right there. You guys at the candy company have your own needs. Even my little law firm does. That's great advice. How could folks reach out? So you mentioned you'll be hiring. Where's the best place to go? Is there a number to call, a website to hit, or just, where should they go?
Yeah,
I know we don't want them to bother you while you're putting out the big fires.
You can go to our website and there's a way to apply right there online.
Perfect. Well, I'll ask my producer to put that website down in the comments so that folks can do that. So thank you. I noticed one final comment come in here, Rob, I want to share with you. Derek Wheat, the son of our state representative, Bill Wheat, he says, congratulations to you on 100 years of Heavenly Hash. But he also mentions he's going to let Dr. Wheat know about the Strawberry Heavenly Hash campaign. So I apologize. I might have gotten you in deep water there. Derek, thanks for watching the show, man. I think the world of you and your family. To our viewers, it's been a blast. And here we go. We have the website here, elmerchocolate.com /join our team. So check that out. Great place to work. Miss Pat and many other folks, Trisha, who was on earlier, that both commented, and many people that have told me over the years they love it there. So keep that in mind. And we thank our guest today, Rob Nelson. He is truly a local legend here in Ponchatoula, and his company is really part of the lifeblood of this community. He's keeping at least 450 families on their feet here. So, Rob, we thank you for your leadership to steward that company through the pandemic and all the challenges, and to keep it growing and keep those great jobs in our community. You probably don't hear it often enough here in Ponchatoula. We appreciate you, your family, and your entire team. So thank you for sharing your valuable time with us today.
I appreciate your time. And